Sometimes it is not the light, but the darkness that awakens us to who we truly are, for only when stripped bare do we discover the strength we never knew we carried. When an avoidant enters the gravitational pull of a narcissist, something profound and unsettling happens within their psyche. The narcissist, with their relentless hunger for control, validation, and domination, projects their unresolved shadows onto the avoidant. In the beginning, the avoidant resists consciously, retreating into silence and distance, but unconsciously, they begin to absorb what the narcissist radiates. This process is not a choice, but a psychological necessity. The avoidant, who has long avoided the discomfort of deep emotional confrontation, is suddenly confronted with an overwhelming flood of energy that is both destructive and revelatory. The narcissist's darkness is not merely abusive behavior, it is the external manifestation of hidden wounds, insecurities, and a fractured sense of self. As the avoidant absorbs this darkness, they unknowingly begin the process of shadow integration. The shadow, the repository of all denied emotions, repressed desires, and unacknowledged pain, is something the avoidant has spent much of their life evading. Their coping mechanism has always been distance, keeping others at arm's length to prevent vulnerability, to prevent the raw exposure of their innermost self. Yet when faced with the narcissist's manipulations, criticisms, and projections, the avoidant cannot escape as easily as before. The narcissist forces the hidden aspects of their psyche to surface, the shame they tried to bury, the anger they never expressed, the fears they refused to acknowledge. These fragments now find a mirror in the narcissist's behavior. This confrontation is brutal because it strips the avoidant of the illusion that detachment protects them from pain. Instead, they learn that detachment only buries the pain deeper, where it festers and grows in the unconscious. In absorbing the narcissist's darkness, the avoidant begins to encounter unfamiliar emotions within themselves. They might notice an uncharacteristic rage, a bitterness, or a cynicism that seems alien, yet it is their own shadow now illuminated. What once lived hidden in the unconscious is forced into awareness. This process is terrifying, for the avoidant realizes that the narcissist is not only tormenting them externally, but awakening parts of themselves they have long suppressed. Yet paradoxically, this painful absorption becomes the catalyst for transformation. To endure the narcissist, the avoidant must confront what they have denied within themselves. They must recognize that the seeds of manipulation, coldness, and abandonment also exist within their psyche, even if in subtler forms. Shadow integration does not mean becoming like the narcissist, but rather recognizing that darkness exists within every human being. For the avoidant, this realization shatters the fragile self-image of being the distant but harmless observer. They now see themselves as a whole being, capable of light and capable of darkness. The narcissist, in their destructive way, has forced the avoidant into this awakening. The avoidant begins to understand that true wholeness cannot be achieved by denying what is uncomfortable. Wholeness requires the courage to face and embrace the shadow, to own the parts of the self that were hidden, and to use them not for harm, but for growth. As this process unfolds, the avoidant starts to notice a strange empowerment arising from what once felt unbearable. They no longer view the narcissist's cruelty solely as external oppression, but as an invitation to see their own unconscious clearly. This shift is crucial because it transforms the avoidant from a passive absorber of pain into an active alchemist of their own psyche. The narcissist's darkness becomes raw material, and the avoidant, through confrontation and endurance, begins shaping it into self-awareness and strength. This is the essence of shadow integration, not escaping the darkness, but using it as the very path to light. Transformation through pain is never a path someone willingly chooses. Yet it becomes the crucible where the avoidant's identity is reshaped after surviving the narcissist's influence. Pain, in this context, is not just emotional suffering, but a profound dismantling of illusions. For much of their life, the avoidant survives by creating walls, distance, and a sense of self-sufficiency that shields them from vulnerability. These walls convince them that if they keep their heart hidden, they will remain safe. But the narcissist's presence tears through those defenses with precision. Through cycles of idealization, devaluation, and control, the narcissist exposes the avoidant to an intensity of pain they have never allowed themselves to experience fully. The result is both destructive and transformative, for this pain becomes the fire that strips the avoidant of old illusions. At first, the pain is overwhelming, almost unbearable. The avoidant feels betrayed, manipulated, and consumed by a darkness that does not seem their own. They may retreat deeper into isolation, convinced that distance will save them, yet the emotional wounds inflicted are too deep to ignore. The narcissist's tactics dismantle the avoidant's fragile structures of security, leaving them raw and vulnerable. This exposure is cruel, but it also forces the avoidant to look inward. The very coping mechanisms that once served as protection now reveal their limitations. Avoidance no longer shields them from suffering. In fact, it intensifies it, because the unresolved wounds within are magnified by the narcissist's presence. This realization is painful but vital. It shows the avoidant that running from emotions only delays their confrontation. Transformation through pain comes when the avoidant stops resisting the discomfort and begins to allow it to teach them. They start to see that every criticism, every manipulation, every cold withdrawal from the narcissist reflects something deeper within themselves. The narcissist becomes an unrelenting mirror, showing the avoidant all the vulnerabilities they have denied. In facing this reflection, the avoidant learns that pain is not merely something to escape, but a messenger carrying truths about the self. Pain reveals the depth of their longing for connection, the fragility of their hidden wounds, and the strength buried beneath their silence. It strips them of the illusion that distance is power, replacing it with the understanding that true strength comes from facing life directly, even when it hurts. This painful process does not happen overnight. The avoidant moves through cycles of despair, anger, and grief, each stage unraveling another layer of their old identity. They mourn not only the relationship with the narcissist, but also the version of themselves that once believed avoidance was safety. Slowly, transformation emerges from this grief. The avoidant discovers resilience they did not know they possessed. The very pain that once seemed unbearable becomes a source of clarity. They learn to recognize manipulation for what it is, to set boundaries where none existed before, and to value their own inner truth above external approval. Pain, when endured and reflected upon, transforms into wisdom. The avoidant begins to see the narcissist not only as a tormentor, but as an unwilling teacher who exposed the fragility of their defenses. The suffering becomes the doorway to a new self-awareness, showing them that survival is not about escape, but about integration. In walking through the fire of pain, the avoidant becomes more whole, no longer hiding from their wounds, but allowing them to shape a stronger, more authentic identity. The transformation is born not in spite of the pain, but because of it, for it is the burning away of illusions that reveals the deeper truth of who they are becoming. The avoidant has always relied on distance as a shield, retreating into silence and observation when life feels overwhelming. To outsiders, this appears as detachment, but beneath it lies a deep need for self-preservation. When caught in the orbit of a narcissist, this very trait, once seen as a weakness or flaw, becomes their hidden strength. The narcissist thrives on constant validation and emotional engagement, pulling their victims into cycles of chaos and control. Yet the avoidant, by nature, does not engage in the same way. Their instinct to withdraw, to analyze from a distance, to remain quiet when provoked, becomes a form of survival. What once was a wall that kept them from intimacy becomes a fortress that shields them from complete annihilation under the narcissist's relentless demands. In the storm of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional intensity, the avoidant's ability to detach allows them to endure. While others may be consumed entirely by the narcissist's fire, the avoidant's natural inclination to step back gives them space to breathe, to think, and to hold on to fragments of themselves that might otherwise be lost. The silence they once used to avoid vulnerability now becomes a weapon against the narcissist's attempts to provoke and control. By not always reacting, by not feeding the narcissist's hunger for dominance, the avoidant unknowingly denies them the fuel they crave. This unintentional resistance plants the seed of resilience. As the struggle continues, the avoidant begins to recognize the hidden value of their nature. The very qualities they once judged themselves for, emotional distance, withdrawal, overthinking, now serve as armor. This does not mean they are unaffected by the narcissist's cruelty, but it means they are not as easily broken. Their capacity to retreat inward becomes a source of strength, allowing them to observe the narcissist's patterns with clarity. They begin to see the cycles, the tactics, the illusions for what they are. This perspective gives them something rare, the ability to discern reality in the midst of distortion. The narcissist's chaos cannot fully engulf them because they can step back into their inner world, even when that inner world feels lonely. Over time, the avoidant realizes that their silence is not just a defensive posture, but a source of clarity. In their quiet, they hear the truth beneath the noise. They recognize the lies, the manipulation, the projections for what they are, because they are not endlessly entangled in reactive emotion. While others might fight or plead for recognition, the avoidant watches and waits, conserving their strength. This is not passivity. It is endurance. It is the ability to withstand without being entirely consumed. Their detachment, sharpened through suffering, becomes a survival tool that transforms into wisdom. Eventually, this inner strength evolves into something greater. The avoidant learns that they are capable not only of surviving, but of protecting their sense of self. They see how their natural traits, once used to avoid intimacy, can now be used consciously to set boundaries, to recognize toxicity, and to preserve their inner truth. The narcissist's darkness, which once seemed like an endless abyss, no longer has the power to devour them fully. They stand apart, scarred but not destroyed, because their distance gave them room to endure. What was once escape has now been reshaped into resilience. Their silence, their detachment, and their capacity for observation transform from shields of fear into instruments of survival and strength. Through this process, the avoidant comes to understand that what they thought was their greatest weakness has always been their hidden power. When the avoidant endures the narcissist's world of manipulation and projection, something unexpected begins to happen within them. The relationship strips away illusions, forcing the avoidant to confront not only the narcissist's cruelty, but also the fragile layers of identity they once relied on to survive. For much of their life, the avoidant has constructed a self that is defined by distance, by avoidance of conflict, by a false sense of safety rooted in withdrawal. They believed that if they remained hidden, unseen, and unengaged, they could protect themselves from pain. Yet under the weight of the narcissist's relentless demands and distortions, this false self cannot hold. The avoidant is forced to watch it shatter piece by piece until only something raw and unmasked remains. This destruction of illusions is profoundly disorienting, but it is also a kind of awakening. The narcissist's projections act like a relentless mirror, reflecting all the parts of the avoidant they have tried to bury. The avoidant cannot hide behind silence or distance anymore, because the narcissist's energy is too invasive, too penetrating. What emerges is a confrontation with their true identity, an identity they never allowed themselves to see clearly before. This identity is not defined by avoidance, not defined by walls or fear, but by something much deeper, the authentic self that has long been suppressed. In the chaos of the narcissist's control, the avoidant realizes that much of who they thought they were was only a mask. They were not truly cold, but afraid of being hurt. They were not truly detached, but fearful of being consumed by others' needs. They were not truly indifferent, but terrified of being vulnerable. These realizations strike hard because they expose the gap between who the avoidant pretended to be and who they actually are. And yet, this exposure is liberating. By surviving the narcissist, the avoidant begins to see that authenticity is not weakness, but power. They learn that their true identity cannot be destroyed by manipulation. It can only be revealed. This awakening does not arrive in peace, but in turmoil. The avoidant may first feel stripped bare, defenseless without their old strategies. They may feel lost, unsure of who they are without the walls they built. But slowly, clarity grows in the space where illusion has been burned away. They begin to recognize qualities within themselves that were long hidden, a deep sensitivity, a quiet strength, a longing for genuine connection, and an ability to see truth beneath appearances. These qualities are not born out of the narcissist's darkness, but revealed because of it. The very experience that sought to destroy them has paradoxically led them closer to their authentic self. As this process unfolds, the avoidant begins to walk differently in the world. No longer do they rely solely on avoidance to navigate life. Instead, they start to trust the voice of their inner truth. They see that their authenticity is not something to fear, but something to protect and nurture. They discover that vulnerability, while once terrifying, is the gateway to genuine connection, and they realize that being authentic does not mean being defenseless. It means being rooted in a truth that cannot be manipulated. In surviving the narcissist, the avoidant awakens to the fact that their true identity is not fragile but resilient. It was never the mask that protected them, but the essence beneath it. What the narcissist tried to suppress becomes what saves them. Their awakening to authenticity becomes the foundation for a new life, one not built on fear and avoidance, but on clarity and self-acceptance. Through this painful journey, the avoidant becomes more than a survivor. They become a person who knows who they are, not because of what they hide, but because of what they finally allow themselves to be. To understand who the avoidant becomes after enduring the narcissist's darkness, one must imagine the journey of an alchemist who takes base metals and, through fire and pressure, transforms them into gold. The avoidant, after surviving manipulation, projection, and emotional starvation, embodies this archetype. They take in what is toxic, what is poisonous, what seems unbearable, and through endurance and reflection, they transmute it into wisdom and strength. The process is not immediate nor without suffering. It is long, filled with despair, confusion, and the temptation to collapse into bitterness. Yet in surviving, the avoidant discovers a hidden capacity for transformation. They realize that their survival is not only endurance, but the art of turning darkness into light. In the beginning, the avoidant feels consumed by the narcissist's energy. Their silence, once a shield, is invaded by manipulation and control. They are left with feelings of emptiness, shame, and betrayal. It is in this emptiness that the alchemical process begins. The avoidant starts to examine their pain rather than run from it. They begin to notice patterns, not just in the narcissist's behavior, but in their own. They see the cycles of avoidance, the ways they have hidden from their own emotions, and how these patterns left them vulnerable to the narcissist's influence. This recognition is the first step in transformation, for alchemy requires awareness of the raw material before it can be transmuted. As they confront these realizations, the avoidant starts to change their relationship with darkness. Instead of seeing it as an enemy to flee, they begin to treat it as material to work with. Every insult, every moment of abandonment, every manipulative game becomes something they can examine and learn from. The avoidant learns to sit with discomfort, to hold pain without breaking, to transform silence into clarity rather than numbness. They see that suffering, though cruel, carries meaning. It becomes a forge, burning away illusions and leaving only what is real. Through this process, the avoidant begins to uncover strengths they never recognized. They learn resilience not as resistance to pain, but as the ability to move through it and emerge changed. They learn discernment, the ability to see through facades and lies because they have already witnessed the extremes of manipulation. They learn boundaries, not from theory, but from necessity, because survival required them to say no where once they said nothing. Slowly, these lessons weave together into a new form of self-mastery. The alchemy deepens when the avoidant realizes that they do not have to carry the narcissist's darkness forever. Absorbing it was inevitable, but keeping it is a choice. They begin to transform bitterness into understanding, fear into vigilance, pain into wisdom. This is the essence of their survival. They no longer see themselves as victims of cruelty, but as individuals who have extracted meaning from it. In this way, the avoidant transcends the experience. They are not defined by the narcissist's actions, but by the strength they gained in responding to them. The transformation into an alchemist means that the avoidant now walks with a kind of inner authority. They understand the value of silence, the necessity of boundaries, and the power of clarity. They see their past not as wasted suffering, but as material that has been refined into strength. Where they once avoided life, they now face it directly. Where they once feared vulnerability, they now see it as part of their wholeness. They carry the scars of the experience, but those scars no longer bind them. They mark the places where transformation has occurred. In becoming the alchemist, the avoidant discovers that even the darkest encounters can be turned into a source of light, and that survival, when met with awareness, becomes the path to true self-mastery. The journey of the avoidant through the narcissist's darkness is not merely a tale of suffering, but of transformation. What begins as absorption of pain becomes the integration of the shadow, the confrontation of illusions, and the awakening of authenticity. In enduring, the avoidant learns that their silence can become strength, their distance can become clarity, and their wounds can become the doorway to wisdom. They emerge not as the same person who once hid from life, but as one who has faced it fully and been reshaped by fire. The avoidant who survives does not remain a victim of the narcissist's cruelty. They become the alchemist of their own soul, one who turns suffering into self-mastery and darkness into light.